Courage starts small and grows as you do. And I'll add to that, eventually you believe more is possible than you did in the beginning, but you never will if you don't start somewhere.
Courage starts small and grows as you do. The more you practice it, the better you will get at it, and you're only ever going to practice it when you take the opportunities.
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another very special, as always, NLU Weekly Live podcast for week number 120, leaning into courage and vulnerability. So Alan has been running book club since the inception, and I have not gone, I don't think, to almost any of them, maybe none of them. But Alan has been talking a lot about vulnerability and Brené Brown because that is the book that is in book club right now. So we thought, well, we haven't done a live podcast on vulnerability, I don't believe. And what goes with vulnerability is courage. Being vulnerable requires courage. And I think I get asked about vulnerability a lot, and I always say, I think people assume being vulnerable makes them weak, but having the ability to be vulnerable requires such a great amount of strength that it cannot be weak. And we're going to talk about that today.
So we're going to open today up with a quote that this book, so this is the book that we're reading in book club. I know I've been talking a lot about it lately because it's such a powerful concept. It is impossible to achieve anything of value without some form of courage. I'll never forget the very first time I ever sent a direct message to my beautiful girlfriend, Emilia, and it was true or false, are you in a relationship? Because I was, we had talked a little bit. She suggested some topics for the Hyperconscious podcast back when we were hyperconscious, and I was super, super interested, but I saw on her Facebook that it said she was in a relationship, but I didn't see any guys' names, and I didn't see any guys in any of the photos, and I didn't want to be a homewrecker, but I really did want to know, and I was interested. And so eventually, I remember, like it was yesterday, Friday night, I'm in the gym, Impact Fitness, and I'm just not in a great place. And it's a weekend evening, and I'm alone again, working out, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to send this message. At this point, I had already unsent the message 3 other times. On Instagram DM, when you send a message, you can hit unsend, and it doesn't even say that you sent anything. And it's funny because now we've talked about this, and she's like, yeah, I remember getting notifications and then having no message be there. It was so weird. So eventually I worked up the courage and the vulnerability to just ask, and it was this simple. True or false, are you in a relationship? And we had already DM'd a little bit before that, but nothing on the dating side. And she said, yes, in a relationship with myself. And it turns out actually at the time she was with Bianca, who was a dear friend and client of mine at the time, and they were hanging out that evening. And they were watching The Lion King, which is one of my favorite movies in the world. And so we went off on all these audio messages to each other, and we were super, super inseparable after that. And that never would have happened had I not had the courage to put myself out there. So the through line of this live podcast is achieving your dreams in health, wealth, or love, which is what Next Level University is about, is extremely vulnerable, which takes a ton of courage. Kevin and I, right now, are live on Facebook and LinkedIn, and all of our friends and family from our entire life, aunts, uncles, extended family, Emilia's family, you name it, could watch this right now. You want to talk about vulnerability, putting yourself out there? What if I have something on my face? What if I say something wrong? What if I say something stupid, which I will, right? We've screwed up on these mics so many times, it's not even funny. It takes tremendous, tremendous courage to achieve your dreams. And so we're going to open with a quote. So Brené Brown, if you've ever read any of her work, a lot of her work has this quote in it. It's called The Man in the Arena by Teddy Roosevelt. And I'm actually going to read it like I did in book club, but I want to read it from the male and female perspective. So I'm going to adjust it a little bit to account for both. So here we go. It is not the critic who counts, not the man or woman who points out how the strong man or woman stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he or she fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Anyone who has ever chased their dreams, whether it be in a relationship or in fitness or doing a fitness show or becoming a podcaster or a speaker or an actor or an actress or you name it, anything. If you've ever put yourself out there to try to achieve something different, that took courage, that took vulnerability. That's what we're going to talk about today. And at least if you fail, which you will, fail forward, you'll do so daring greatly. And I think that's really what today's about.
As you may or may not know, I think it was March 27th of 2022, we had a Next Level Live in Worcester, Massachusetts. And there was a young lady who is local to us who has been a family member of Next Level U for a while. And I sent her a message and I said, hey, we're having this event. I think this would be huge for you to get outside of your comfort zone. I know it's going to be uncomfortable. I know it's going to require courage, but I guarantee it will be worth it. And this person said, I'll think about it and I'll let you know. And eventually this person reached out and said, hey, I got my ticket. And I said, I just saw it come through. I'm so proud of you. So we get to the event. I end up meeting this person in person for the first time, which was wonderful. And she said, oh my goodness, I'm so happy I'm here. I'm so proud of myself for coming. I know this took a lot of courage on my end, but I'm so grateful. I'm so happy for this opportunity. And I was like, I'm so proud of you. I know how difficult this can be. But again, this is something that you'll remember forever. We did a giveaway where everybody picked a number out of a hat, I think, and we picked winners for free calls with myself, Alan, Dr. Taryn, and Tori Leto. And this person won a free call, and she picked me, which was awesome. I was so grateful for that. And we ended up doing this free call, and we're just digging deep into her past and her experience and what she wants out of life. And she said, honestly, I'd like to be a speaker at some point. I mean, maybe even a podcaster down the road. And I said, that's awesome. That makes me so happy. I'm so glad this all happened and aligned this way. And I said, okay, I want to go through kind of an exercise with you. So when we talk about courage and vulnerability, specifically courage, we're talking about fear often, right? Facing fear. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, you want to be a speaker. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fearful, how much outside of your comfort zone, how afraid would you be to give a speech to all of your Facebook right now? Just jump on live and do it. And she said, that's a 12 out of 10. And I said, yeah, I feel you on that one. No worries. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much outside of your comfort zone is it for you to send just record a video on your cell phone and don't show anybody? And she said, oh, that's like a 0. That's pretty easy. I said, okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how outside of your comfort zone is it for you to record a video and just send it to me only? And she said, that's probably like a 5. I said, perfect. Our first point today, courage starts small and grows as you do. That person at the very beginning of this entire journey for them had to have the courage to listen to our podcast. Then they had to have the courage to reach out to us, buy a ticket, show up, right? And then show up to the call after and then record that video, which she ended up sending me. And it was truly wonderful. I said, you're way better than you think. But you never would know that if you didn't have the courage to take the first step. The thought I always have with this, Alan, and you know me, I like analogies. Sometimes they land, sometimes they go right into the garbage. This one I think is pretty good. I think of courage as kind of a mountain climb. When you're at the very bottom of the mountain, you can only see the next peak. You can't see the summit. And then when you get the courage to get to the first peak, then you can see the next peak. And then you get the courage to get to the next peak, and then rinse and repeat. A lot of us, we're standing at the bottom of this giant mountain, and we're looking up from behind, and we can see, oh, the summit's way up there. I don't think I could ever get there. It's not about getting there. It's about getting to the first base camp, and then the second one, and then the first peak, and then the second peak. Courage is something that grows as you do. And it's one of those weird things where it's almost like the second opportunity to fear chase doesn't come until you prove that you can get through the first. And it's that weird thing. I always use the video game analogy. You don't know what weapons you need in the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th level, but you got to trust that you're going to learn something in level 1, level 2, level 3. So our first point, courage starts small and grows as you do. And I'll add to that, eventually you believe more is possible than you did in the beginning, but you never will if you don't start somewhere.
There's a great Les Brown quote. He says, people are either living their dreams or living their fears. And if you don't have the courage, I often say this, if the fear is a level 4 fear, that means you need level 5 courage. If the fear is a level 10 fear, you need level 10 courage to even try it. And so to Kevin's point, you have to start and build. So Kev, I'm going to flip the script here and ask you a question. So we used to talk about fear chasing all the time, constantly. I recently was on the phone with a new client, and we always do a MIM, M-I-M, most important metric. So we track habits, and then there's one most important metric. What's the one thing that we need to track for you to stay on track? And she said, honestly, I think it's fear chasing. And we were very specific about what type of fear chasing. She wants to teach teens. And right now she's only teaching, I think, kindergartners. And she's afraid that if she were to teach teens, they would be unengaged or on their phones or not pay attention, or maybe they judge her or criticize what she says, that kind of thing. So fear chasing in that specific arena. So be specific with your fear chasing. But my question for you, Kev, is, first of all, why don't we talk about fear chasing anymore? And then 2, what did it for you? Because I think that now with 1,000 episodes and a global podcast and 18 shows that we produce outside of our own and a massive 16-person team and 24 departments and tons of revenue, not tons, but a lot more revenue than in the beginning, which was $0.
Pounds of revenue.
Pounds of revenue. What's your perspective on fear chasing now versus what it was in the beginning?
I would say, number one, the last time we did a fear chasing episode, I believe, was when we were in Florida for that event that was terrible, that we didn't enjoy. I think that was the last time we did a fear chasing episode, so I'm open to doing it again. I think we just probably have been focusing on other things. My perspective, I don't know. I feel like the time it's the scariest is the first time. I really do. I really feel like the first time you do anything, that's when you figure out how afraid you are, and then you realize, oh, you know what? This isn't as bad as I thought it was. That's been my experience. My experience is I never believed something was possible for me. And this is what I've been saying a lot lately, Alan. I think that we confuse our I'm not sure's with hard no's. So like a hard no is, no, I am not doing that. I am not capable of that. I'm not brave enough for that. So right now for me, like jumping out of a plane, hard no. I'm not courageous enough to do that. It's too much fear for me. But at one point, getting into a plane was too much fear for me. And that was a hard no until there was a great enough reason for me to do it. There was a great enough reason for me to get out of that comfort zone. I think you have to rely on momentum. I just have a lot of momentum now. In the very beginning, I had you pushing me. I remember one of the worst things ever. Alan called me up one day and he said, hey man, we're going to go to this networking event tonight. It's on a private island in Cape Cod. And I was like, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that at all. And I ended up doing it because Alan said, well, this is something that's very, very important. You need to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to meet awesome people. And Kev, this is stuff that we're going to be doing in the future when we have a business and when we're interviewing people. I think you'll prove a lot to yourself. And I remember we pulled onto this like one-way private street, and we pull up to this gate, and they're like, what's the code? And I was like, what's the code? And Alan's like, let me go through my phone, because he didn't know the code. And we had the code, and we went in. And it ended up being, all things considered, it was a pretty good experience for me. But I just think that you have to have a reason that's big enough, and then you have to ride the momentum. You just got to ride the momentum into the next thing. Because when you have momentum, it's a little bit easier to show up. So we can definitely do episodes on fear chasing all day, every day. And I would say the biggest understanding I have now that I didn't is, number one, opening the door the first time is always the hardest. If you leave the door open with momentum, it's easier to go. Attach some sort of necessity to it, and then make sure you believe it will be worth it. You know this, Alan. I didn't always think this was possible for me, but I always believed it would be worth it. I think that's something that I've been very lucky to have, because I always believed the pain and the insecurity and the uncertainty and the getting outside of my comfort zone would always be worth it. So I think that's an important part too.
I had a moment while you were talking, because at one point the plane was a hard no, And jumping out of a plane is still a hard no. Totally understandable.
Yeah.
But you're about to do a hot air balloon.
That was a hard no until I. This is another thing about fear chasing. Gather data. I literally said to Taryn said, "Will you do a hot air balloon with me?" I said, "Absolutely not. That sounds like the worst idea ever. It's literally a balloon. You know what I mean? That's a pass for me. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that." And then I looked up the stats, and it said it's wildly safe. It's safer than every other form of air travel. And I said, okay, well, I'm in on that. I'm going to take a plane to get there. So if I'm going to do that, I can do this. So I think it's the data. It's the data.
AKA awareness.
The awareness. The data in my mind is if I jump out of a plane with a parachute and it doesn't open, I will die. Most likely. I mean, the odds are pretty high that you don't survive unless I bounce off a tree or something, but that's a pass. Hard no for right now.
I'll never forget when I looked this up, and to the data point or awareness, I looked up how many shark deaths per year on average in the U.S. 1.
Could be me.
Less than 1. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how irrational are we?
I know.
Right? Because, like, okay, and I also have looked up motor vehicle accidents, motor vehicle deaths. 38,000 as of 2018. 39,000, I think, actually. In 2012, it was like 43,000. But we get in our car every day, no problem, no big deal, right?
Yeah.
Strap on the seatbelt, off to the races. Hopefully, seatbelt. But in the ocean, I'm always scared. Always.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so irrational.
Lack of control. Lack of control. I think when we talk about vulnerability, I try to make this land, but I don't know if it ever does. The most vulnerable part of something is the thing that's most easily broken. So what's the most vulnerable part of an airplane? It's the engine. If the engine goes, things are not good. Things are going to end badly, potentially. I know they can still fly and all that. But when you think about vulnerability, it's the opportunity to be hurt. It's putting yourself out there. It's having a weak spot. It's having an opportunity for injury. And I think one of the reasons it's the ocean is a thing is because it's out of your control. You have no control over that. Zero. Where you get in your car every day and you put on whatever book you're listening to, you put in your AirPods and you're putzing on down the road in full control.
And I think, it's interesting because on the road, you don't actually have full control, but you do have control over your own car.
I feel like you do, yeah.
You at least feel like you do, exactly, which everyone's emotional, not just rational, right? So that's another piece of this, courage and vulnerability. I think a lot of vulnerability is your willingness to be emotional. Recently on book club, this was like really, really hard for me. And I've done this a couple times, but every time I think it's going to be easier and it's actually still pretty challenging. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, if you're on book club, you'll know this. I read something called The Teddy Story. And it's a story that I have saved. I heard it by Dr. Wayne Dyer. He has since passed away, but it's an anonymous story. I don't know where he found it, but I learned it probably 6 years ago, something like that. And every time I read this story, even if I'm alone, I remember I was in a Qdoba, Kev, I swear to God, reading this story because I needed to get in touch with my heart and not just be in my head. And whenever I'm struggling, I usually go to something that gets me back in my emotions. There's certain movies. Titanic is one of them. The Teddy Story. There's certain movies. And so I'm reading this, and I remember a waitress came over and asked if I was okay because I was just bawling. Like, I'd already finished my food, so it wasn't crying into my food. But so on book club, I wanted to have the courage because reading this story alone and crying is not. It's courageous, but it's not nearly as courageous as opening book club with this. So there's probably, 10 people on book club. And if Christina's watching or listening, she'll know because she was there. And I essentially just read this Teddy story and I told everyone, I said, listen, the reason I'm doing this is because Brené Brown's book is literally about vulnerability and I want to lead by example. So I'm going to read this story in front of everybody and hopefully it'll touch all our hearts. But I literally bawled the whole time, like could barely get through it. And it wasn't until a week or two later, I was on the phone with one of my clients who was actually at book club, and she was like, I could never do that. I could never do that, like bawl like that in front of people. And I was like, no, you totally could. You just shouldn't necessarily start there, right? And so again, to the same point, courage starts small and grows as you do. At one point, I would not have been able to do that on book club. I remember I did it live in the private Facebook group once. And then someone made a rude comment, and I remember, Kev, you booted him.
I was ready to physically fight them. You don't mess with my boy. Mm-mm. No, you're not going to mess with anybody in the fam. Mm-mm.
Appreciate it. And no disrespect is tolerated in that private Facebook group, by the way. So if you're in there right now, we appreciate you, but be respectful. And so anyways, I started small, reading it alone in Qdoba, obviously. And then eventually I read it in the live private Facebook group. And then eventually I read it in book club. And I wanted to open it for one of my speeches. That's my dream, is one of my speeches I want to open with that. And I honestly, at some point, feel like the audience might be like, all right, like, how long is this going to take? Because I'm trying to get through it. But my point is this. You cannot achieve your dreams without courage and vulnerability. And you have to take the opportunities to actually grow it. And I can't pretend that I was always good at vulnerability. I can tell you that there's certain fears that I'm not afraid of that other people are, so they think I'm super courageous. But there's certain things that I am very afraid of that I still struggle with. And so don't let anyone convince you they don't have fears. Don't let anyone convince you that they're courageous all the time. I think that all of us have different fears. And so what seems courageous to one person might actually not be that courageous, because for them, they're just not afraid. So for example, Kev, you doing jujitsu, for example, you've done it before. You're probably not that scared. Whereas my first time, I'm going to be super scared. So I might think you're super courageous when in reality, it might just be experience talking, like jumping on these microphones, for example. 10 out of 10 or 12 out of 10 for that person you were referring to. For us, not that courageous anymore, although it still is when we talk about vulnerability in certain topics. So this is my point. Courage starts small and grows as you do. The more you practice it, the better you will get at it. And you're only ever going to practice it when you take the opportunities. I've chickened out many times at reading the Teddy story, but I was like, not this time. And so I did. I got through the whole thing, and it was a powerful, powerful book club.
Hey guys, it's Ramos, and I am happy that I was in group coaching for a second time. It definitely helps to have accountability and all of that good stuff. I feel like I am constantly going up and down and everything, but it's always good to have someone message on WhatsApp and then a reminder, hey, get back on it. So it was good. I definitely got a lot of good information that I'm going to continue learning because I am a little backed up, but I'm happy that I invested in this because it was investing in me. And even better, I get to meet people that are doing the same exact thing to help themselves. And I need friends and close people around me like that, So yeah, I really appreciated being in group coaching because of the accountability and because of meeting people.
You actually read it. I remember, because I was so uncomfortable. Because I was like, how when I get uncomfortable, I smile?
Oh, yeah.
You were like bawling your eyes out, and I was like laughing, and I was like, he's going to think I'm such a terrible human being. But this was this was our first quote unquote studio. We had a 2-camera shoot, and you were reading it. We were in your sister's old bedroom. You did it that time too.
Oh, I did.
So I don't know when that was. It seems like many moons ago, but you did it then.
Yeah.
As well.
No, I do remember that. Yep. That was probably a long episode.
Definitely. Don't laugh because he's going to think you hate him. And I was like, don't laugh, Kev. But I was so uncomfortable because I didn't know what to do with it.
Oh, of course.
Like, do I say you're good, man? What do you do?
I know. This client, you just be vulnerable. That's the answer, right? You just be vulnerable.
Yeah.
This client that I was telling you, she's like, yeah, it was so uncomfortable to watch you do that. And I understand it was uncomfortable to do it. But I think it's important. There's something empowering about it afterwards where it's like when you face that, when you cry in front of a lot of people, it's like after that, everything else feels a little lighter, a little easier. Because when you overcome that fear of judgment, that fear of being seen as weak, you get stronger. I'm telling you, you do.
Yeah.
And
well, especially when that's like, since it's everybody else's fear, you doing it actually shows strength. Episode 1000, for those who, if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to tell you to go watch it just because Alan and I cried a lot. But there was a moment when we were doing episode 1000. I think in the very beginning, I was like, I might cry during this episode. And I think I was probably just kidding. But when we started talking about like how difficult this journey has been and how much we've sacrificed and how grateful we were or are for the amazing community, I had a moment where it was like either you be vulnerable and just feel your feelings or you put the wall up. Up to you. Totally up to you. And I said, I'm going to let it fly. Let these tears fly. And I remember, number one, that was my favorite episode we've ever done in 1050. I think that we're up to 1050 we recorded today. That was number one. Number two, I got more love in my DMs from people with that episode than any other episode, not even close. And number three, I think it showed how brave we are. And I don't mean it, there's no ego with that, but like the fact that there's just two grown men crying on the microphones in front of however many people, I think that showed a level of vulnerability and courage that I wouldn't have had at the beginning of this. So even goes back to the first point, but to Alan's point, anytime you put yourself out there, it's going to be extremely vulnerable. I remember the first time Alan interviewed me back in the day before I had a podcast and Alan had a YouTube channel. You didn't have a podcast, Alan, because you didn't have an RSS feed. Is that true?
Yeah, I had a YouTube.
I'm going to have to say YouTube from now on, just, to make sure I'm accurate with facts.
Sounds good.
So Alan had me on, and I remember thinking to myself, what if I say something wrong? What if I say something incorrect? Like, are people going to watch this and pick on me? Anytime you put yourself out there, you're in an extremely vulnerable situation, and it takes massive courage. And again, don't compare to Alan and I crying on the microphone. Compare to whatever your first episode is, whatever your version of the first episode is, because it takes a long time to get to that. And our courage now, to Alan's point, is just way different than it was in the beginning.
It's the second point here that actually leads really well into it. Putting yourself out there in anything is extremely vulnerable and takes massive courage. That's literally what you just said. I don't know if you knew that was our second point.
I did.
Okay, you did. Strong work. Yeah. So again, putting yourself out there in anything is extremely vulnerable and takes massive courage. So I wanted to put this point down. The first point was mostly Kev, and I agreed, and the second one was mostly me, and he agreed. The reason why is because having coached so many people, studying myself, different backgrounds, different countries, different individuals, different sexes, male and female, all of it, and everything in between. Some people, high amount of wealth, some people, low amount of wealth, all different cultures, all different types of families. Some people no family, some people adopted, some people not. It's you just start to understand there is something in common with all human beings. There's a lot in common with all human beings. But one of the things that really, really, really jumps off the page with such an exhaustive, thousands of coaching calls at this point from people all over the world, you just start to notice every single person is afraid of judgment on some level. Every person has this deep fear of being judged, being criticized, being ridiculed, being made fun of. And Kev, I had a moment, again, on book club recently, and, because we're reading Dare to Lead, so a lot of this is connected. I think I understand. You remember when we had Mama Z on way back? I don't know what episode. It was probably 10 or something, 14.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, yeah.
We were talking about bullying. And we were talking about how, I think she was saying how bullying back when you guys were in my class. So Mama Z, what's her actual name? I always
Caroline
call her
Zani.
Caroline Zani, yeah. So we interviewed her. And she was actually our health teacher back in middle school. And we were asking her all these questions. And she's like, back when you guys were in my classroom, bullying was in person. There was no bullying, cyberbullying. There was no, and what she was saying now is, when these kids go home, they're not free from the bullying because the bullying is happening via text and Snapchat and TikTok and all these other things. And I realized that I think one of the reasons why human beings struggle to be vulnerable is because we all go through that age where we're somewhat cruel. And I had an age, and I'll be vulnerable and share this. There was one time in my life where I was a bully. And it was only once, and I'm very grateful for that. And of course, I've had bullying moments maybe of being unkind. But there was one time when I was really a bully. And his name was Josh, and he was a little kid. And I think I was in 4th grade, and we were at Taft, Kev. And we had recess every single day, and I kept tripping him. I would always trip Josh. And he was littler than me, and I would bully him. And luckily, I grew out of this very, very quickly. And that was the only time I ever did that. But I remember thinking to myself, what are the chances he's going to feel good about himself when I was like that? And then in high school, I got bullied a lot. And I was small. And I remember feeling what that felt like. And I think that's why we have so much armor. I think there's a time, we all have armor for many different reasons. And armor, what I mean is, we all have these protectors and this ego that like we don't want to be found out, and we don't want to ask a dumb question, and we don't want to put ourselves out there, and we don't want to tell our story, and we don't want people to know that we're emotional and that we're not perfect. All of that armor is built up because, and I'll tell this story very briefly. I had a close friend of mine who said one silly comment once about if you were in the woods and you needed to go to the bathroom, you could just go to a river. And you don't need toilet paper. You could go to a river and then you could just wipe in the river. And I swear to you, and this is literally his friends, and I'm lucky I never really participated in this. To my knowledge, this person might say, no, you did. He got called poo hand for that comment. Right, literally. For like a decade after that.
I didn't see that coming.
And I'm telling you, Kev, that is why we have so much armor. What are the chances this person is going to put themselves out there again when he said one thing wrong one time and it stuck for like a long time after that?
And that's a true fact too.
Oh,
it's
I know.
Not like that wasn't a smart. That's like
that
actually
was his
a really
argument.
good idea.
Yeah,
it's a really good idea.
That was his argument, right?
I'd be friends with that person.
Exactly. And so again, we all can remember a time where we said something quote unquote dumb, as a kid, and we got made fun of. And all of us as kids, here's the problem, we're all culprits too. Because I'm sure we've all made fun of people, right? I think that's when we really get the armor. I'm telling you, it's when kids are really brutally unkind in those phases, and we build this armor up, and now all of a sudden we're so afraid to look dumb or to fail or to screw up. I tell the stories about being laughed at in math class, and by the entire class, and it messes with you. It messes with you, and there's a lot more trauma beyond that. But I do think bullying has a lot to do with it, genuinely.
What was your, and you might not remember this exact frame and time, but what was your thought process asking the first question after you got laughed at by the entire class? I never would have asked a question again. I would have changed my name and moved probably because I would have been so afraid. Seriously. That's why I didn't ask questions. Does anybody have any questions? I would look around like, does anybody have the same? Somebody's got to have the same question I have. Nope. All right. Looks like we're gonna fail our next test then.
Yeah. Does everyone understand the material? One thing I'll say, and I don't think I'm good at a lot of stuff, but one thing I will say that I have always been good at is my desire to achieve my goals and dreams has always been greater than my fear of judgment. And not always. Let me reframe that. In the long run, it always has been. I have bouts in my life, Kev, where I was staying small and afraid of judgment and didn't put myself out there, but it never stuck around. It never stayed. I remember this late night one time, I watched The Rock on YouTube for until I told you the story, until 4 a.m. And he inspired me so much because he made a lot of terrible movies, right? Let's be honest. Some of those movies really sucked.
Oh, yeah.
But look at him now. He's the most highest paid actor in Hollywood. He inspires people all over the world, right? Look at what he's become. And he has a tough childhood. He was evicted at 16 and, all that kind of stuff. And it's I remember thinking to myself, I can't spend the rest of my life trying not to be disliked by a bunch of people. And I finally made this decision, Kev. And this was when I was very young. I decided I would, if I'm going to be hated on, which seems to happen no matter what I do, for whatever reason, by the way, I'm going to do it at least for being me. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do it in achieving my goals and dreams. Because I can't live with myself without maximizing my potential and my impact and my greatest level of contribution. And I would rather achieve my goals and dreams than be liked. And that was a really hard decision. And I revisit that regularly, by the way, genuinely, because there's a lot of people out there right now. I said this on book club. I said, there's a lot of people out there right now who don't like me, a lot. But there's also, I'm inspiring more people all over the world than I ever have. And I really believe those go hand in hand. And so, again, it takes courage and vulnerability every single time. But I think that my desire to achieve my dreams has always been greater than my fear. And that's the fight we're all fighting.
Great answer. You're very welcome. I know for a lot of people, one of the most vulnerable, courageous things you can do is give feedback to another human being, especially someone you love. That is one of the most challenging things in the world for me. I know I have what I have coined and I've started calling vulnerable shares. So anytime I have, anytime I feel any type of way and I want to express it to Taryn, I'll just say, hey, can I have a moment for a vulnerable share? And then we'll just sit down and I will do my best to express the feelings that I'm dealing with. But I know that if you think about it, the relationships that you have that are the best, that are the most aligned, are probably the ones that feel the most true. So the third and last point, we have 4 minutes. The quality of your relationships is the level of vulnerability within them. Alan and I have had a lot of people tell us that we will not succeed as business partners. And I understand why, because there's a lot of ego in business, and that's a whole nother topic, a whole nother live podcast. But what they don't understand is Alan and I have been very, very, very truthful and very, very, very honest and very, very vulnerable with one another. And that's one of the reasons we've grown so close over the last 5 years. Yes, we're in business and we do podcasts and we've done 1,050 episodes, but the conversations behind the scenes are often like, hey, I've been struggling with this. Hey, I've been dealing with this. Hey, this is kind of my kryptonite right now. And Alan and I are, I would say, living in the truth more often than other friendships. And we have to, because we have extra necessity with the business. But the quality of our relationship is so high because the level of vulnerability within it is very high, aka the level of truth is very high. We know what's real, we know what's not. We tell each other the difficult truths, and I'm trying to do that better in all my relationships because I believe not only is that your responsibility, because the point of a relationship is growth, but it's going to help you become more courageous. It's going to help you become more confident in that relationship, and you're going to have a higher likelihood of success if you're living in the truth too.
So I wrote this down, and it's actually very incongruent with what you said, Kev. I remember when Kevin and I were with a mentor out in California, and this mentor and I were talking about their future. And this is a very, very successful multimillionaire, semi-famous mentor. And we were talking about business and leverage buyouts and, how he could grow his net worth and in other words, just kind of like what his next steps are, because he had just changed industries and he was soul searching. And so we had a really awesome conversation about this, and Kev was just kind of sitting there. And this is Kevin's words. I felt like Steven Glansberg, which is a super bad reference. If you've never seen Super Bad, there's someone eating lunch alone named Steven Glansberg. And after that, Kev came to me and he essentially said, like, I'm not smart enough. And I don't feel good about me. And I don't feel like I'm smart enough to do this. And ever since we had that conversation, and by the way, the vulnerable share thing, that's fire. Like, hey, I have a vulnerable share. We should definitely do that on the NLU team, like in general. That's fire. I'll be using that for sure. I'll try to give you credit. I'll try to remember to give you credit. So I came up with this awesome thing. Amelia and I do it all the time. It's called the vulnerable share.
Yeah, this podcast the other day.
I heard it. It just came to me. Just came to me, right?
It's all yours.
Yeah. No, but that was a vulnerable share moment for Kev of like, dude, I am not smart enough. And we've had a couple of those moments with different interviews.
Of course.
Dean, Stephen Kotler, a couple others. But it was always a different version. Like, I'm not smart enough, or I don't know enough about business, or what books should I read, that kind of thing. And what I would just say is, like, you're just not smart enough yet. You just have to, like, if you want to feel like you fit in with these people, you just have to learn some more. It's not a big deal, right? You totally can do it. And I remember we had a 3.5-hour Q&A session with David Meltzer.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and then we went back to the hotel room and it was just like, another vulnerable share. But we've had so many of those. And so I guess this last point, the quality of your relationships is the level of vulnerability within them. But I also want to say the quality of your relationship with yourself. Because I think that I've started to value myself more than I used to when I started to be more honest with myself. And also on top of that, I think that when you're honest with yourself and you're very self-aware, you can make these positive changes. And so Kev didn't just have to come to me and say, I don't think I'm smart enough yet. He had to admit that to himself first. And if he didn't admit that to himself, he would not have read a book every day for 45 minutes a day for the last, ever since that conversation. And now I think it's a half hour, right? A half hour a day. Mm-hmm. So imagine what your life could look like if you really said, you know what? Maybe I'm not smart enough yet. And admit that to yourself. That's a vulnerable place. Okay, crap. Now what? Okay, well, let's learn a little more. What books should I read? You know, and I've given you a lot of book recommendations, and you've come way up. I mean, way up. And I guarantee you that conversation would make a lot of sense to you now. If we could go back in time and have you sitting there, I guarantee you'd be able to add value to the conversation.
Yeah.
And it'd probably be Brant. No, I'm kidding. It'd probably be the other person who is like trying to get on our level in some ways. So,
well, unfortunately, we'll never know because I don't know if we have a time. Do you have a time machine? If you have a time machine, let me know.
Not yet.
Okay. Well, that's one
Working
way
on
to get the income up.
Yeah.
Anybody wants to purchase a possibly working time machine, please reach out to us. The Next Level You Time Machine. That's the name of it.
I'm working on how to pause time.
Okay. I know that's your superpower. Next Level Nation. One of the most vulnerable things we do is we host events and we get out of our comfort zones fairly often. If you did not have the opportunity to come to Next Level Live, which was in March, we have it fully packaged on our website. It is a purchasable, is that a word? Purchasable course. It has my speech, Alan's speech, Dr. Taryn's speech, Tori Aletto's speech, and the Q&A as well. So if you were not able to attend live, we have it as an online course. It is $47, a rare bargain, a bargain at twice the price, some would say.
Not bad. We also have a challenge. You may know this. You might have seen it come through the Instagram story or the Facebook story. It's called #NextLevel9. We did, for episode number 999, we celebrated by adding more to our plate. No. Yep. So this community is about accountability and consistency and goals and dreams. Holistic self-improvement for dream chasers. Heart-driven, but no BS. The #NextLevel9 challenge is 3 habits under health, 3 habits under wealth, 3 habits under love. The Next Level 9 for episode 999. Amy has put the link in the comments if you're watching live, and Ron will put the link in the show notes if you're not watching live. So thank you, Ron and Amy. The #NextLevel9 challenge. If you tag Kevin or myself on Instagram or Facebook, we will reshare your story post. Join us for the Next Level 9.
The biggest difference between the person you are today and the person you want to be is your habits. So if you adopt those 9 habits, who knows what your life can look like in a year, 2 years, 5 years. I mean, we'll say a couple months, a year, 2 years, because 5 years is a long time to put out there.